At 3:22 in the morning, my phone lit up with a message from my 12-year-old son. 3 words. Dad. No windows. My blood went cold. I design federal prisons for a living. I know exactly what a building with no windows means. I left everything behind and drove 11 hours through the night. What I found at that camp broke something inside me that 26 years of walking through lockdown facilities never could. My wife, the woman I had given everything to, had put our son in a cage. And the man holding the keys was her own brother. They planned it together, financed it together, and buried every trace so deep that if I had come home on schedule, I might never have found him at all. I appreciate you being here for this one. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped reading the fine print? Yes or no? I would love to hear it. I read more of your words than you realize. A few details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling purposes. The lesson at its heart is what I hope stays with you. My name is Warren Caldwell. I am 57 years old, and for the last 26 years, I have worked as a federal architect, designing secure facilities for the Bureau of Prisons. Maximum security wings, solitary confinement blocks, intake processing centers where the hallways are angled so that no single camera has a blind spot. I know the gauge of every steel door the federal government installs. I know how much concrete you need between a man and the outside world to make the outside world stop existing for him. The first thing a secure building takes from you is orientation. No windows means no sunrise, no sunset, no way to feel the hours pass through your skin, the way free people do without thinking. You replace time with routine. The building becomes the clock, and the person inside stops remembering that clocks are not supposed to have walls. When my son typed no windows, he was not complaining about architecture. He was telling me, in the only language he knew I would understand, exactly what kind of building he was in. The message arrived while I stood on a half-finished foundation slab outside Billings, Montana. A federal detention center. 12 buildings. 3 years on the drafting table. 2 hours earlier, the geotechnical team had flagged a subsurface fault that nobody's survey had caught. The project was suspended. Crews sent home. I was supposed to stay another 4 weeks, but the fault changed everything. They released me that night. I stared at the text for 11 seconds. I know the count because I watched them tick on the lock screen while my brain tried to reject what my hands already understood. Then I grabbed my keys, left my field bag half-zipped on the motel bed, and walked to the parking lot. The drive from Billings to Cedar Ridge Academy in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia is 1,043 miles. I covered it in 11 hours on thermos, coffee, and the specific fuel of a man who has realized that every comfortable assumption he built his life on was load-bearing in the wrong direction. When an architect says something is load-bearing, he means it holds up everything above it. When it fails, nothing above it survives. My son Micah is 12. He has my jaw and his mother's eyes. His real mother, who died when he was 2. He has ADHD and eidetic memory, which means his brain moves faster than most rooms can handle, and he remembers everything he sees. Faces, numbers, the position of every object on a desk after a 7-second glance. His teachers called it a distraction. It was a weapon. He just had not needed one yet. 16 months ago, I married Nadine Voss after what I believed was an accidental meeting at an architecture gala in Charlotte. Wine on my jacket. An apology that became dinner. A courtship that moved at exactly the speed a lonely widower with a young son would find flattering but not suspicious. She was 39, worked in nonprofit development, and had a way of making every room feel managed without anyone noticing the management. I married her because managed felt like loved. I know the difference now. South of Charleston, the cell signal died. And in the silence, I pulled up a voicemail Micah had left 3 weeks earlier. I had listened to it once and could not bring myself to listen again. Hey, Dad. Everything is fine here. I am learning a lot. Call me when you. A metallic sound. Heavy. Structural. A pause long enough to fit something ugly inside. When you get a chance. Micah has said fine to me 1,000 times. Fine when he skinned his elbow at 6. Fine when his best friend moved away in 3rd grade. Fine when I told him I would be gone 6 weeks. Every time the word had texture. Irritation. Bravery. Something real pressing through the syllable. This fine was hollow. Prefabricated. He said it the way people read from a card taped to a wall just out of the camera frame. At a fuel station outside Beckley, I replayed the voicemail through the truck speakers. The metallic sound was clearer. Not a pan dropping. Not a locker. It was heavy and structural. The sound of a steel security door rolling on a track with a counterweight system. I know that sound because I have designed the housing for those counterweights. I have specified the rail gauge, the roller diameter, the clearance tolerances. Prisons have that sound. Military storage facilities have that sound. Summer camps do not. Nadine answered on the 5th ring. Her voice arrived with the practiced warmth of a woman who had rehearsed sincerity until it passed for real. Marcus, I was not expecting you until the 14th. She corrected herself a half-second later with a small laugh. Sorry, Warren. Half asleep. Marcus. A name that belongs to no one in my life, and no one in hers that I have met. I filed it the way I file anomalies on structural inspections. Noted. Time-stamped. Flagged. The project was suspended, I said. Where is Micah? He is at camp. We discussed this before you left. I remembered signing papers. 2 frantic hours between projects. A stack on the kitchen counter. Nadine pointing to the yellow tabs. Just the flagged ones. The enrollment deadlines will not wait. I signed them without reading. The memory sat in my stomach like wet concrete. I want to talk to him. They do not allow outside contact during the integration period. No disruptions to the adjustment process. I want you to notice that pause between my question and her answer. It was not the pause of someone remembering. It was the pause of someone deciding how much to give away. I have heard contractors explain cracks in load-bearing walls with that same cadence. Confident. Measured. And exactly 1 sentence ahead of the question they hope you will not ask. She knew the return date of a project she had no reason to track. She used the phrase integration period without hesitation, like a term she had rehearsed for someone else in a conversation I was not part of. I asked for the address. She gave it to me flat, like reading numbers off a wall. A road in the mountains of West Virginia. I wrote it on the back of a fuel receipt with a pencil almost too dull to mark. Warren, please do not just show up. You will disrupt his adjustment, and they will. I hung up. The highway opened into the dark corridor of the Appalachian foothills, pine trees and coal cuts, and the occasional pair of headlights passing like warnings nobody reads. My son was somewhere ahead. Behind a door that made a sound I had spent my career putting into buildings. And the woman who put him there had just called me by another man's name. 2 texts. That is what my son had left me before the voicemail. 2 messages sitting in our thread. Like 2 knocks on a door, nobody answered. The first, Dad, when are you coming home, sent August 29th. I had replied next month from a job site in Billings and gone back to reading foundation specs. The second, 4 days later, just my name with a question mark. Dad? I replied the same 2 words. Next month. And I had not thought about it again until right now, driving 83 miles an hour through the Appalachian dark with my jaw clenched so tight my back teeth ached. 2 questions from my 12-year-old son. I answered both with the same 2 words. Then I went back to calculating soil compression ratios while someone was compressing my family into a shape I would not recognize when I finally looked up. There was no third text. I checked the thread 4 times between Beckley and Princeton, each time hoping I had missed something. A follow-up. An angry emoji. Anything that meant he was still reaching. The thread ended September 2nd. His last word to me was my own name, followed by a question mark floating in a blue bubble with no reply beneath it, except my useless identical next month. Either he gave up on me, or someone took the phone out of his hands. I pressed the accelerator past 85 because both possibilities were exactly as bad, and the only variable I could control was the distance between me and that iron gate. I need to tell you about Blueprint now because she tried to warn me, and I punished her for it. Blueprint was a 9-year-old calico with one crooked ear and a purr that sounded like a small engine idling in a warm room. My first wife had found her at a shelter the year before she died, named her Blueprint because the kitten had a habit of sitting on whatever document I left on the kitchen table. Architectural drawings, permit applications, inspection reports. She sat on all of them equally, without preference, as if the content was irrelevant, and the only thing that mattered was placing herself between me and my work. After my wife passed, Blueprint became the fixed point. She slept at the foot of Micah's bed every night for 10 years. She followed him from room to room with the unhurried certainty of a creature who had decided that wherever this boy went, she went too. 16 months ago, the evening Nadine first came for dinner, Blueprint met her at the front door and would not move. Not hissing, growling, the low, chest-deep kind that is not a warning but a verdict. She planted herself between the threshold and the woman walking up the steps, and her body said, "This is not negotiable." Micah stood behind the screen door watching. 12 years old. His mother's sharp cheekbones. A habit of cataloging details the way other boys collected trading cards. He did not say a word. He just watched me pick Blueprint up and carry her to the laundry room. Nadine laughed on the porch. "She will get used to me. Cats always do." Blueprint never did. The second time was March. I came home from a 4-day site visit to find Nadine in Micah's bedroom, helping him organize for the semester. Blueprint was throwing herself against the laundry room door in a rhythm I had never heard. 3 short scratches, 1 long, 3 short. Like a signal. Micah was sitting on his bed holding a stack of folded shirts, watching Nadine open and close his dresser drawers. He had the expression of someone being helped by a person they did not ask help from. I locked Blueprint in the laundry room. I told Micah that Nadine was just being nice. He nodded the way he nods when he has decided the argument is not worth having. He was 12 years old. He should not have already known how to make that calculation. I need you to understand what I did. I had a cat who was telling me the truth every single day, and I locked her behind a door for it. By August, Blueprint in the laundry room was the default. Her warning had become background noise, something I stepped over on my way to the quiet, managed comfort of a house Nadine had reorganized around herself. So gradually, I did not notice the furniture had moved until I could not find my own coffee mugs. The last night before Micah was driven to that camp, Blueprint scratched the garage door until 3 in the morning. I lay in bed listening, too tired to get up, while Nadine lay beside me with the particular stillness of someone who is very much awake. At some point, the scratching stopped. I looked out the window. Blueprint was sitting at the garage door, motionless, watching the house through the gap beneath it. She stayed like that until dawn. That was her last warning. After that, she went quiet. 10 days later, Nadine told me Blueprint had gotten sick suddenly, and the vet could not save her. She said it on the phone while I was reviewing structural specs in Montana. She said she had handled the burial so I would not have to worry. Her voice was kind, practiced. The same voice she used for everything she wanted me to stop thinking about. I drove south through the dark thinking about all of this. The rain had stopped somewhere past the West Virginia line, and the highway opened up into that long, empty stretch where there is nothing but mountain silhouettes and truckers running their headlights on high beam. I had 7 hours behind me, and nothing to do with the remaining 4 except inventory every signal I had missed. I opened my email at a stoplight in Lewisburg. There it was, buried under 6 weeks of construction specs and expense approvals. A message from the office of the camp director, sent the same week I left for Montana. During the adjustment period, direct contact is temporarily restricted to ensure optimal integration. All inquiries should be directed to the administrative office. I had never heard of a camp that restricted a parent from calling his own child. I had also never opened this email when it arrived because I was standing on a foundation slab reading soil reports, and my son's summer camp was something I had already filed under handled. Nadine handled it. That was the arrangement. I worked. She managed. Somewhere in the efficiency of that division, I stopped noticing that the person being managed was my son. I pulled up the satellite image of Cedar Ridge Academy on my phone at a fuel stop outside White Sulphur Springs. The image was dated 2019, 4 years old. Whatever was there now could be different. But what the satellite showed was this: an iron gate, a dirt road swallowed by trees within 40 yards, and behind the canopy, just visible at the edge of the frame, a long red brick building with no windows on the ground floor. I have reviewed the layouts of 47 secure federal facilities in 26 years. I have studied schools, hospitals, warehouses, military storage depots, and 2 federal holding centers in West Virginia. That building matched several of those categories. It matched them in the proportions, in the absence of ground floor fenestration, in the placement of what appeared to be a vehicle-rated gate on a single access road. It looked like a lot of things. A summer camp was not one of them. I closed the satellite image and pulled back onto the interstate. But that windowless building stayed behind my eyes like a flashbulb afterimage. My son was somewhere inside it. The last creature in my house who had tried to warn me was already in the ground, and the woman who told me the cat had just gotten sick was checking her phone somewhere in a house I was no longer sure was mine. I found Cedar Ridge Academy at 4:03 in the morning, and the first thing I saw was my son carrying a wooden crate in the dark. The drive had taken 11 hours. I had not stopped except for fuel, had not slept, had run on cold coffee, and the particular arithmetic of a man who knows he has made a terrible mistake, but cannot yet calculate its full dimension. Now I was parked 200 yards from a locked iron gate on a dirt road in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, with my work binoculars pressed against my eye sockets hard enough to leave marks. The brochure I had found online during a fuel stop outside White Sulphur Springs had promised sunlit activity fields, a modern science lab, smiling children in pressed uniforms, beneath a tagline about building tomorrow's leaders. The place in front of me had a high-angle security camera bolted to a steel post, no welcome sign, and a dirt road that disappeared into fog 20 yards past the gate. The red brick building from the satellite image was real. So were the missing ground floor windows, replaced by narrow ventilation slits, the kind I had specified on industrial storage facilities in my early career. Not for light. For air circulation in spaces where light was considered unnecessary. 5 children in gray uniforms were unloading wooden crates from a flatbed truck backed up to a storage shed. No one spoke. No one laughed. The truck's diesel engine idled in the wet air, and the only other sound was wood scraping on concrete as the crates came off the tailgate one at a time. Their movements had the synchronized silence of people who had learned that sound attracts attention, and attention attracts consequence. The third child turned to set a crate on the stack, and the fog shifted just enough. Micah. He was thinner. That was the first thing. Not the thinness of a growth spurt, which stretches a boy upward and leaves him looking temporarily borrowed from a longer body. This was subtraction. Something had been taken from him that food would not return. His cheekbones were sharper than 6 weeks ago. His arms held the crate from underneath, chin tucked, the posture of someone carrying something heavier than wood. The gray uniform hung on his frame like it had been issued to a boy who used to be larger. The second thing was his eyes. They were fixed on the ground, with the kind of focus that is not concentration. It is compliance. Someone had taken my son, a boy who walked into every room scanning corners, cataloging exits, noticing what did not belong, and in 42 days trained that out of him. I had designed enough isolation protocols to recognize the result. When you remove orientation, you remove curiosity. When you remove curiosity, you get obedience. It is not discipline. It is demolition. If you have never watched your child through binoculars at 4 in the morning because you were not allowed through the front gate, I hope you never learn what that does to the architecture of your chest. It is not anger. Not yet. Anger comes later when you have somewhere to aim it. What I felt was closer to the moment an architect sees the first fracture propagate across a load-bearing wall. The recognition that something fundamental has already failed and everything still standing is standing on borrowed time. I put the binoculars down. My hands were shaking. Not from cold. In 12 years, I had never seen my son enter or leave a space without checking what was around him. He did it at grocery stores, at the school entrance, at the kitchen door, when he heard an unfamiliar voice. It was not a habit I taught him. He came by it the way some children come by left-handedness, as an innate orientation toward awareness. Now he moved like the other 4 children. Eyes down. Rhythm mechanical. No scanning. No curiosity. 5 small figures in synchronized silence. If you had watched from a distance without binoculars, you might have mistaken it for structure. I did not mistake it for anything. The morning chill came through the cracked truck window, carrying red clay and diesel and something else. Kitchen grease, drifting from a vent on the east side of the building. I shifted the binoculars right and found a lit window. A kitchen. Stainless steel counters, industrial stove, a row of plates being set along a serving line. A man moved through the frame. Around 50. Salt and pepper hair cut short. Moving with the unhurried economy of someone comfortable in a commercial kitchen. His hands worked a spatula over a flat griddle, and nothing about him registered as unusual at first glance. A cook, making breakfast at a summer camp. Unremarkable as wallpaper. Then a figure in a collared shirt stormed through the kitchen side door. Even through the glass and at 200 yards I could see the posture. Rigid arm. Pointing finger. Mouth open. A staff member berating a child who stood at the dish station with wet hands frozen in midair. Every person in that kitchen flinched. The child at the sink. A second child carrying a tray. A woman restocking napkins by the door. Their shoulders came up. Their hands went still. Their bodies contracted the way bodies do when shouting is the weather, and you have learned to make yourself small until it passes. The cook did not flinch. His hands paused for 1 second, spatula hovering above the griddle, then resumed. He did not turn his head. He did not look at the staff member or the child. He did something more interesting. He glanced up at the security camera mounted above the kitchen door, held the look for exactly 1 beat, and turned back to his eggs. I filed it the way I file hairline fractures on inspection reports. Noted. Time-stamped. Flagged for follow-up. Then he did something I could not explain at all. He set down his spatula, turned to the window facing the dirt parking area, and looked directly at the spot where my truck sat. 200 yards away. Behind tinted glass. Engine off. In a vehicle he had no reason to know was there. He held the look for 3 seconds. Then he gave 1 small nod. Not to me. Not to anyone I could see. And went back to his eggs. The morning fog swallowed the building's edges. My coffee was cold. My son was 50 yards past a locked gate, carrying crates before sunrise, because someone had decided that was what his mornings were for now. And a cook I had never met had just acknowledged my presence from inside a building I could not enter. I did not understand the nod. A cook checking a window could mean anything. But I have spent 26 years reading structures, and when something does not fit the blueprint, I do not ignore it. I mark it. I come back to it. I let the building tell me what it is trying to hide. That man was trying to tell me something. And my son, the boy with the eidetic memory and the scanning habit that someone had spent 6 weeks crushing out of him, was 50 yards away in a gray uniform. Eyes on the ground, carrying weight that had nothing to do with wood. I did not wait to understand the cook's nod. I got out of the truck and walked straight to the gate, because waiting had stopped being something I was capable of. The iron was cold under my palm. Up close, the gate was heavier than it looked. Commercial grade. Vehicle impact rated, with rust blooming at the hinges where years of Mountain Dew had been working the metal. I have specified gates like this for federal intake facilities. They are not designed to welcome people. They are designed to process them. The security camera above it blinked a red light every 2 seconds. I pressed the intercom button and held it. Static. Then a voice. Young, male, careful. Cedar Ridge Academy. How can I help you? My name is Warren Caldwell. My son, Micah Caldwell, is enrolled here. I am at the front gate, and I need to see him. A pause. The kind that involves someone looking at someone else. Sir, all visits are by appointment only. 72 hours notice minimum. I can provide you a number to call. I am his father. I do not need an appointment to see my own child. Sir, I understand. But our integration protocol requires. Open the gate. Another pause. I heard the click of a radio channel switching. The guard came back on, with the rehearsed patience of someone who had been trained for this specific conversation. Sir, I have contacted our administrative office. Someone will reach out to you within 48 hours. In the meantime, I need to ask you to return to your vehicle. I did not return to my vehicle. I stood at the gate with both hands on the bars and watched the building through the trees. The children had finished unloading the truck and gone inside. The kitchen light was still on. The cook was no longer visible. The fog was thinning at the edges, and somewhere behind the building, a generator hummed the low, steady note of a machine that runs all night because something inside requires constant power. 16 minutes later, a county cruiser came up the dirt road and parked behind my truck. 16 minutes. I want you to sit with that number. A county deputy in rural Appalachian, West Virginia. Population sparse. Nearest station at least 30 minutes from anything. Arrived 16 minutes after a security guard pressed a radio button. That is not response time. That is a standing arrangement. Deputy Ray Suttles stepped out of the cruiser without urgency. Late 30s. Sunburned across the nose and forearms. The careful neutrality of a man who had been told exactly what to say before he arrived. He adjusted his belt, closed the door with one hand, and walked toward me like we were about to discuss a parking violation. Morning, sir. Everything all right out here? My son is inside that camp. I have not spoken to him in 6 weeks. They will not let me through the gate. I understand that is frustrating, but the camp is a private institution on private property. If they have a visitation policy, that is within their rights. Do you have children, deputy? He did not answer. He looked at the gate, then at me, then at his dashboard. His jaw worked once, like he was chewing on something he could not swallow. That look was the answer. Sir, there is no violation here. I would recommend contacting them through proper channels. He said it the way people read from a card. Even cadence. No emphasis on any particular word. The verbal equivalent of a form letter. Then he got back in his cruiser and sat there with the engine running until I returned to my truck. I drove 500 meters down the road and pulled off onto a gravel shoulder behind a stand of red maples. The deputy's cruiser passed me 2 minutes later. He did not slow down. He did not look. I opened my laptop. 26 years I had been reading what was underneath things other people walked over without thinking. Foundation, soil reports, structural load calculations, subsurface drainage maps, ventilation schematics. As a GS-14 federal architect, I had access to the National Building Permit Database, county property records, historical construction filings, and the architectural archive maintained by the General Services Administration going back to the middle of the last century. I had never once used any of it for anything other than federal facility design. I typed in the Cedar Ridge property coordinates. The first record told me the land had been an Appalachian Coal Company extraction site in the 1960s, a deep-shaft bituminous coal mine, operational from 1961 to 1978, decommissioned after a ventilation fire. The surface structures were converted to military storage in 1982, decommissioned again in 1994, sold to a private trust in 2001, and converted to its current use sometime after 2004. The building footprint matched what I had seen through the binoculars. The main structure sat on the old mine's surface foundation, which explained the windowless ground floor. Those were not design choices. They were inherited infrastructure. Coal mine surface buildings do not need windows at ground level because the work happens underground and the ground floor is for equipment, not people. The second record told me something the camp's architects either did not know or did not care about. A ventilation shaft. 80 centimeters in diameter. Part of the original mine's emergency air supply system, predating the camp by 4 decades. It ran from a decommissioned pump station 280 meters northeast of the main building, under a public utility easement the county had never revoked, directly into the basement level of the northeast corner. 80 centimeters. That is roughly 31 inches. Tight for a man my size. But I had crawled through tighter during the Kanawha Valley facility inspection in 2019. A collapsed utility chase where the only access was a maintenance shaft I had to enter sideways with my hard hat removed. This was wider, straighter, and it terminated inside the property line, not outside it. I checked the pump station's location on the satellite overlay. It sat on a public road, under county jurisdiction. Whatever Cedar Ridge owned, whatever fences they had built, whatever deputies they had on speed dial, and whatever 72-hour policies they had written into their intake contracts, they did not own the ground beneath them. Not this part of it. The gate could keep me out. The deputy and his rehearsed script could keep me out. The intercom and its 48-hour promise could keep me out. But nobody had thought to secure the ventilation system because nobody expected a father to come at this problem the way an architect reads a building, from the inside out. From underneath. I closed the laptop and opened the trunk. Headlamp, protective coveralls, work gloves, knee pads, a respirator mask, rated for hydrogen sulfide and methane because a decommissioned coal mine still carries gas. These were the tools I packed for every site inspection. The equipment of a man who had spent his career designing the insides of buildings other people were never meant to leave. I was not going through the gate. I was going under it. I almost missed it. A black box, the size of a cigarette pack, fixed by a neodymium magnet to the frame rail behind the rear axle, in the one spot a civilian would never think to check. I found it because 26 years of crawling under buildings had given me a habit most people do not have. Before I drive, I check underneath. Not every time. But that morning, parked on a gravel shoulder in rural West Virginia, with a deputy who had arrived too fast and a gate that would not open, something in my professional instincts told me to look at the undercarriage, the way I would look at a foundation after a suspicious settlement report. Not for what was supposed to be there. For what was not, the box was smooth, warm from residual engine heat, mounted with a magnet strong enough that I had to pry it free with 2 fingers. It was not the fleet tracker my agency installs on government vehicles. I knew where that one sat. Up near the transmission housing with a federal asset sticker on it. This was something else. Consumer-grade shell, but modified. No brand markings. A cellular antenna thinner than a matchstick protruding from one corner. I did not remove it. A tracker you know about is a tracker you can use. I drove 10 miles to a commercial truck lot outside Mill Spring, parked between 2 long-haul rigs, where the signal would look stationary, and rented a sedan from a counter inside the fuel station, using a backup credit card I had opened years ago for emergencies. From the rental's parking lot, I called a colleague at the DOT regional office who had worked fleet security for 15 years. "That is not federal hardware," he said after I described it. "Consumer grade, modified for extended battery and cellular uplink. Whoever placed it wanted daily location pings, not just trip logs. How long has your truck been accessible to someone other than you?" The answer arrived before I finished the math. Nadine had driven my truck to the dealership for an oil change in March, while I was on the Montana project. She had volunteered. She said the service light was on and she did not want me worrying about it while I was away. Sibrache. That comes. That come. Every time I had told Nadine my schedule, leaving Monday, Back Thursday. Stopping in Lewisburg for fuel. She was not listening. She was confirming. Every window where I was far enough away for long enough was not a gap in my calendar. It was an opening in hers. The tracker verified it in real time, and the woman who had planted it had done so while pretending to do me a favor. I left the truck at the lot with its tracker pinging to no one in particular and drove the rental to the motel in Marlinton. The enrollment contract had arrived by email at 11 the previous night, not from Vivian Cross, but from an administrative address with no name attached. I printed it at the motel front desk. 16 pages. Densitup, 3 signature tabs with my initials on each one. I remembered the pen. I remembered the kitchen counter. I remembered Nadine pointing to the yellow tabs with her index finger. Just the flagged ones, Warren. The deadline will not wait. I did not remember a single word on any of those pages. Owen Brightwell was a Marlinton attorney in his early 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a desk buried under land survey folders. He handled property disputes, timber rights, the kind of quiet legal work that keeps a small-town practice open in a county where most of the economy runs on hunting season and natural gas royalties. I found him in the phone book, the actual paper phone book in the motel nightstand, because I did not want to search for lawyers on a phone that might also be compromised. He read the contract twice before he looked up. "This clause here," he said, tapping the middle of page 7. "The camp may determine all aspects of the enrollee's schedule, activities, and communication throughout the program period." He removed his glasses and set them on the document. "Mr. Caldwell, that is not an education agreement. That is a labor waiver, dressed in academic language." He turned to page 10. "And this supplementary rider, agricultural operations, facility maintenance, material handling, and production support as part of experiential leadership curriculum. They are authorizing your son to perform manual labor, farm work, construction tasks, warehouse operations under the heading of character development." I signed it. That was the thing I could not get past. Nobody forged my name on that document. Nobody held a gun to my hand. I picked up a pen in a 2-hour window between projects and signed away my son's rights because I was in a hurry, and my wife pointed to the yellow tabs, and I trusted her the way you trust the floor beneath your feet without thinking, because thinking about it would mean admitting you had built your life on something that might not be solid. "Did you read any of this before signing?" Owen asked. "No. I had 2 hours between projects." He nodded. Not with judgment, with the weary recognition of a man who had seen what shortcuts cost in 30 years of rural practice, where people signed mineral rights away over kitchen tables because the landman seemed friendly and the check was already written. He turned to the last page and pointed to the footer. Small type. Barely legible in the printout's low resolution. "The drafting firm is Whitfield and Carlisle in Charlotte. I know them by reputation. They handle commercial real estate, shopping centers, LLC formations, corporate property structures. I have been practicing for 31 years, and I have never seen a summer camp enrollment contract come out of a firm like that." "Who hired them? That is the question, is it not?" He set his glasses on the contract. "Mr. Caldwell, whoever built this document knew exactly what they were building. This is not a camp policy someone copied from a template. This is bespoke legal architecture designed to make compulsory labor look like curriculum and isolation look like pedagogy. And the drafting date is 4 months before your son's enrollment. They commissioned this document in May. Micah was enrolled in August, 4 months before. Someone had walked into a Charlotte law office in the spring, described exactly what they needed, and paid enough for a commercial real estate firm to draft a document that had nothing to do with real estate and everything to do with making a building full of children look legal from the outside. They started building the cage before they had the occupant. I drove back to the motel with the contract on the passenger seat and the tracker pinging uselessly at a truck lot 10 miles away. The cage had been designed in May. My son was placed inside it in August, and the blueprint for all of it had been drawn up in the same kind of office where I had spent my career drawing blueprints of my own. except mine were meant to contain people who had been convicted of something. This one was built for a 12-year-old boy whose only crime was having a father too busy to read what he was signing. That afternoon I checked my email for the 20th time, expecting nothing, and found everything in the one place I had not thought to look. The spam folder. One message. Received at 6:47 the previous evening from an address that was nothing but randomized numbers at a disposable mail service. Subject line. From the boy's friend. 4 words that rearranged the temperature in the room. 5. Your child sat down and wrote to you 5 times. 5 times someone walked those pages from his hands into a drawer and closed it. 5 letters that never left the building. I held that number the way you hold a crack pattern on a load-bearing wall, not with surprise, with the slow confirmation that the damage is worse than the surface suggested. The email was short. No greeting, no sign-off, no name. Dad, your son wrote you 5 letters. The letters are held in the director's desk. There is a counselor here who goes by the name Mercer. He is dangerous. She asked me to pass this along if anyone ever came looking for him. I cannot say more. Be careful. I read it 3 times. The tone was careful, literate, adult, not a child. The word dad was not the sender speaking. It was a quotation. Someone was relaying what Micah had asked them to say, using his word for me as a credential. Whoever this person was knew my email address, knew how to use a disposable service, and had been close enough to my son that he trusted them with a message meant for me. She asked me. The pronoun was wrong. Micah is not a she. Either the sender made an error under pressure, or the message had been passed through more than one set of hands before reaching the keyboard. Either way, someone inside Cedar Ridge had risked their position to send 7 sentences to a stranger. I traced the sending IP address. It took 20 minutes and a network diagnostic tool I was not technically supposed to use for personal purposes. The address resolved to a public terminal at the Harmon County Library, 14 miles from Cedar Ridge. I pulled up the library's website. 3 public access computers. Open Wednesdays and Fridays only. Today was Wednesday. The cook's face surfaced in my mind. Salt and pepper hair. Hands that paused instead of flinching. That nod through the kitchen window, aimed at a truck he should not have been able to see. Someone at Cedar Ridge had midweek access to leave campus and reach a public terminal. Someone with the composure to send an anonymous message and the proximity to hear my son ask for help. I did not have proof. But I had a library, a day of the week, and the memory of a man who looked at a security camera like he knew exactly what it was recording and for whom. The Harmon County Library opened at 1 on Wednesdays, and I was parked outside at 12:47. It was a small building, single story, brick facade, a handicap ramp with peeling paint, and a bulletin board by the door advertising a church supper and a missing beagle. Inside, fluorescent lights, carpet that smelled like cleaner and old bindings, and 3 public access computers lined up against the far wall beneath a clock that ticked loud enough to hear from the entrance. Mabel Harwick stood behind the circulation desk. Early 60s. Reading glasses on a beaded chain. The kind of librarian who remembered every face that walked through her door and filed them by frequency and purpose. I showed her a photograph of Micah on my phone and asked if she had seen this boy. Not the boy, Mabel said. But there is a man. Security staff, I think, from that camp up the road. Comes every Wednesday. Uses the computer for about 30 minutes. Prints 1 page. Leaves. Quiet. Polite. Never checks out a book. Does he talk to anyone? No. Comes alone. Keeps to himself. Last week, he left something on the printer tray. She opened a drawer beneath the desk. I set it aside, meaning to return it, but he has not been back yet. She handed me a single sheet of paper. My hands went still. It was a map, hand-drawn in blue ballpoint over a printed satellite image of the Cedar Ridge campus. Every building was labeled. every room numbered. In the margins, annotations in small, precise, deliberate handwriting. The kitchen was marked with shift times. The main hall had camera positions noted with sight line arrows. A storage building on the south side was labeled Documents, Cold Storage Unit 3. The northeast corner of the property had 2 words circled twice: blind spot, no camera, a dead drop. That is what intelligence professionals call it when you leave information in a public place for the right person to find without direct contact. Except, this was not a spy novel. This was a one-room library in a town with 1 traffic light. And the information was about where they kept children. The basement level was drawn in more detail than the rest. A corridor running east to west. 8 rooms numbered 1 through 8. Room 4 was circled in the same blue ink, and next to it someone had written in letters small enough to miss if you were not looking: isolation. No windows. Padlock exterior. Check on subject twice daily. Subject. Not student. Not child. Not enrollee. Subject. The word you use for a lab specimen, or a detainee, or a line item in a file, no one is supposed to read. My 12-year-old son had been reduced to a classification that would not look out of place in one of my own facility design briefs, and the man who wrote it had underlined it twice because he wanted whoever found this map to understand exactly what that word meant in this context. I photographed every inch of the map with my phone. Then I folded the original and put it in my jacket pocket. Mabel watched me without asking questions. Librarians are good at that. Reading the situation the way they read a title page, taking in the information and deciding how much to say. If that man comes back, I said. Do not mention me. I do not mention anyone, she said. That is policy. I walked to the parking lot. The afternoon sun hit the asphalt and sent up the smell of warm pine resin from the tree line across the road. I stood there holding a map that called my son a subject and thinking about a man who had spent months drawing camera angles with the patience of someone building a case, not making a plea. Whoever he was not improvising. He was engineering something, and the precision of his annotations told me he had been inside that building long enough to know its architecture better than the people who ran it. I was reaching for the car door when my phone rang. Unknown number. Area code I did not recognize. The phone rang 4 times before I answered. Not because I was hesitant, because I was counting. In 26 years of federal architecture, I have learned that anyone who lets a phone ring more than 5 times before you pick up is either selling something or delivering news they rehearsed in a mirror. This caller let it ring exactly 4. Mr. Caldwell. Not a question. A flat, measured statement, the kind of voice that has read your file before dialing. This is Special Agent Jake Marino, FBI Field Office, Charleston. I need you to not hang up. I didn't hang up. He told me he had been monitoring Cedar Ridge Academy for 11 months. Not the camp itself. It's money. A wire fraud investigation had flagged 3 transfers, totaling $381,000, routed through a Delaware LLC called Ridgeline Youth Development Partners. The LLC was registered to a man named Garrett Cross. Garrett Cross was the director of Cedar Ridge Academy. Garrett Cross was also my wife's brother. I pulled the sedan to the shoulder of Route 39 and killed the engine. Moreno continued. The transfers matched a pattern the Bureau had seen in 2 other states, North Carolina and Kentucky, where shell entities funneled tuition payments, state education subsidies, and private insurance reimbursements into layered accounts. Each entity operated a residential program for minors. Each program advertised therapeutic structure, outdoor leadership, and academic enrichment. Each program, upon closer audit, employed children in agricultural or manual labor under contracts designed to look like experiential curricula. We believe Cedar Ridge is the hub, Moreno said. Cross runs operations. Someone else handles the financial architecture. We don't have that second person yet. I stared through the windshield at the tree line. Fog clung to the ridges like smoke that forgot how to rise. I already knew who the second person was. I had shared a bed with her for 16 months. "How did you get my number?" I asked. Owen Brightwell called us. The lawyer. The 63-year-old Marlinton attorney, who had dissected the enrollment contract 2 days earlier, had apparently seen enough in those 16 pages to make a call he was not obligated to make. I owed him more than I understood at that moment. Moreno wanted a meeting. Not a phone conversation, a sit-down, secure location, no digital trail. He gave me an address. A decommissioned Forest Service station 12 miles east of Durban, off a gravel road that didn't appear on most GPS databases. He wanted me there in 2 hours. I was there in 90 minutes. The station was a single-story cinder-block building with a corrugated roof and a padlocked front door. Moreno was already inside. He was younger than his voice suggested, mid-30s. Lean. A scar on his left forearm that looked surgical, and eyes that moved in a pattern I recognized from corrections officers. Door. Window. Hands. Face. Repeat. He had a laptop open on a folding table and 2 manila folders arranged parallel to each other, edges aligned. He didn't shake my hand. He pointed to a chair. "I'm going to show you 3 documents," he said. "Then I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Then I'm going to tell you what I need." The first document was a financial ledger. Printed columns, handwritten annotations in the margins. It showed monthly disbursements from Ridgeline Youth Development Partners to 4 recipients. Cedar Ridge Academy, operations. Whitfield and Carlisle, legal. A catering supplier in Elkins, and a personal account ending in 7,741. The personal account received $12,600 per month. I recognized the last 4 digits. It was Nadine's savings account, the one she told me she closed in January. The second document was an insurance summary. 2 policies, each valued at $1 million, underwritten by a regional carrier in Roanoke. Both policies named Micah as the insured minor. One listed Nadine as the sole beneficiary. The other listed Garrett Cross. The policies had been activated in April, 1 month before the enrollment contract was drafted, 4 months before my son was sent to Cedar Ridge. I read the activation date 3 times. April. The cage was financed before it was built. The third document was a single-page memorandum on Whitfield and Carlisle letterhead, addressed to Garrett Cross, dated March 14. It outlined a 14-month operational timeline for Cedar Ridge Academy, including enrollment targets, labor allocation per minor, revenue projections, and a line item labeled Parental Separation Protocol. The memorandum referenced Phase 2 expansion into a second facility in Harlan County, Kentucky, and a third in Transylvania County, North Carolina. March 14. Nadine and I had been married for 4 months on that date. Micah had just turned 12. We were still unpacking boxes in the house I had bought for us in Lewisburg. She was hanging curtains in his bedroom while this memo was being typed. Moreno closed the laptop. "Question 1, he said. "Did you sign the enrollment contract under duress or deception?" "Deception." She highlighted the signature tabs. "I signed between site inspections. I didn't read it." Question 2. "Do you have reason to believe your son is in immediate physical danger? He was hauling crates at 4 in the morning. He has lost visible weight. He is locked in a basement room labeled Isolation on a map drawn by a staff member who risked his job to get it out." Question 3. "Are you willing to enter that facility through an unauthorized access point to place a recording device, with the understanding that anything you do inside cannot be officially sanctioned by this office?" I looked at the scar on his forearm. I looked at the 2 folders, edges still perfectly aligned. I looked at the door behind me, then the window to my left, then his hands, then his face. "Yes." Moreno nodded once. He reached into a canvas bag beneath the table and placed 3 items in front of me. A matchbox, sized audio recorder with 72 hours of continuous battery life, a roll of matte black gaffer tape, and a prepaid phone with 1 number saved in the contacts, his. "72 hours," he said. "That's the recorder's window. That's also mine. After 72 hours, I either have enough for a warrant, or this conversation never happened." He stood and zipped the canvas bag. At the door, he turned. "Mr. Caldwell, you design the buildings that keep dangerous people contained. For the next 3 days, I need you to think like the people who try to get out." I sat in that cinder block room for 11 minutes after he left. I counted each one. Then I picked up the recorder, the tape, and the phone. And I drove west toward the decommissioned pump station, where an 80-centimeter ventilation shaft waited like an open mouth in the hillside. I had 72 hours to save my son. The clock was already running. The pump station sat 200 yards off a fire road that hadn't been graded in at least a decade. Gravel had surrendered to moss. The concrete housing was cracked along the south face, and the steel access door hung on one hinge like a jaw that had given up trying to close. I parked the sedan behind a stand of hemlocks, where the canopy was thick enough to hide the roof from any satellite pass, and I sat in the dark for 7 minutes, listening. No traffic. No generator hum. No dogs. Only the creek, below the ridge, running fast from 3 days of October rain. I opened the trunk and dressed in the coveralls I had purchased in Marlinton. Steel-toed boots, knee pads rated for concrete nitrile gloves, the hydrogen sulfide respirator I had carried in my field kit since a sewer inspection in Beaumont, Texas, 9 years ago. The headlamp went on last, a red filter model that preserved night vision without throwing a visible beam past 15 feet. The ventilation shaft opening was exactly where the 1994 military decommission blueprint indicated. Northeast corner of the pump station, behind a corroded grate, held by 4 bolts. 3 of the bolts sheared off with a quarter turn. The 4th required a breaker bar. The grate swung outward and I shone the red beam inside. 80 centimeters. 31 inches. I am not a small man, 6'1", 214 pounds, but I have crawled through tighter spaces during construction audits. The shaft angled downward at roughly 12 degrees for the first 40 meters, then leveled. I could see tool marks on the interior walls, pickaxe grooves from the original coal mine ventilation crew, layered beneath smoother concrete patches from the military retrofit. The air smelled of calciumite and standing water, not methane. The respirator stayed on anyway. I entered feet first, pushing the canvas bag ahead of me. Recorder, gaffer tape, prepaid phone, a bottle of water, and the folded map Mabel Harwick had given me at the Harmon County Library. The map that marked every camera, every blind spot, and the basement room where my son was being held. The crawl took 31 minutes. I counted by breath cycles, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, because counting kept the walls from closing. At the 70-meter mark, the shaft connected to a wider lateral duct, roughly 1 meter square, that ran parallel to the basement corridor. I could hear the building now. Not voices systems. The low drone of a commercial HVAC unit cycling air through ductwork that had not been cleaned in years. The intermittent clank of a water heater expanding against old pipe brackets. And beneath everything, the particular silence of a building where people have learned not to make sound. I reached the junction point. The map indicated a vertical drop of approximately 6 feet into a mechanical room adjacent to the basement hallway. The drop had no ladder, but the walls were close enough to chimney down using back and foot pressure. I lowered the bag first on a loop of gaffer tape, then followed. The mechanical room was small, 8 by 10 feet, and filled with outdated equipment. A decommissioned boiler, a water softener tank with disconnected lines, and a breaker panel labeled in handwritten marker. The panel listed 8 circuits. Circuits 1 through 6 were labeled by room number. Circuit 7 was labeled Office, G, C. Circuit 8 had no label, but a strip of red tape covered the breaker switch. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. I eased it open 2 inches. The basement hallway stretched 40 feet in both directions, lit by caged fluorescent tubes spaced every 12 feet. The floor was poured concrete, painted gray, with a yellow center line, the kind of institutional marking I had specified in dozens of federal facilities. 7 doors lined the left wall, each fitted with an exterior-mounted padlock hasp. 5 of the padlocks were open, hanging loose. 2 were closed. Room 4. Room 6. The map had circled room 4. Curtis's handwriting. Isolation. No windows. Padlock exterior. Check on subject twice daily. It was 2:14 a.m. The next check, based on Curtis's note, would be at 5 a.m. I had 2 hours and 46 minutes. I moved to room 4 first. The padlock was a commercial-grade 5-pin tumbler, serious enough to discourage a child, simple enough that any corrections architect who has reviewed 500 lock specifications could feel its weakness in the keyway. I did not pick it. I examined it, photographed the brand and model with the prepaid phone's camera, and moved on. Then I heard breathing. Not from room 4. From room 6. I crouched beside the door. The breathing was shallow, irregular, the pattern of a child trying to stay awake because sleep means vulnerability. I placed my palm flat against the steel and held it there. The metal was cold. No heating duct serviced this room. I could see from the hallway ceiling that ductwork bypassed rooms 4 and 6 entirely. In October, in the West Virginia mountains, that meant these children slept in temperatures that dropped into the low 40s by dawn. I did not knock. I did not speak. I placed the audio recorder against the wall above the door frame, secured it with 3 strips of gaffer tape in a pattern that matched the existing paint texture, and activated the 72-hour timer. The red indicator light blinked once, then went dark. Then I moved to the hallway's east end, where the director's office door bore the initials GC in brass letters. The door was locked, a standard pin tumbler, residential grade. I photographed it and checked the gap beneath. Half an inch of light. Fluorescent. Still on at 2:20 a.m. A faint electronic hum suggested a computer left running. I did not enter. Moreno had been precise. Place the recorder. Document what you can. Leave no trace that cannot be explained by building, settling, or rodent activity. The warrant depended on audio evidence, not physical trespass beyond the ventilation access. I returned to the mechanical room, climbed the shaft, and was back at the sedan by 3:07 a.m. 53 minutes inside. I stripped the coveralls, sealed them in a trash bag, and sat behind the wheel with the prepaid phone in my hand. 1 number saved. I typed 4 words. Recorder placed. Clock started. Moreno's reply came in 9 seconds. Copy. 70. 1 hours remain. I drove to the motel in Durban, locked the door, and opened my laptop. I had designed 47 federal facilities. I had reviewed structural plans for buildings meant to hold the most dangerous people in the country. I had never once imagined I would use that knowledge to map an escape route out of a building designed to hold children. But that is what I did for the next 10 days. Not 72 hours. 10 days. Because on the second morning, Moreno called and said the recorder had already captured something the Bureau had not expected. A voice on a phone call from inside the director's office, discussing a transfer of 3 children to the Kentucky facility within the week. The voice did not belong to Garrett Cross. It belonged to Nadine. The 72-hour window became an active surveillance operation, and I became the only asset close enough to maintain it. Over the next 10 days, I entered Cedar Ridge Academy 4 times. Always through the ventilation shaft. Always between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. Always alone. Each trip lasted between 40 and 67 minutes, and each trip peeled back another layer of a machine that had been built with the same precision I brought to federal blueprints. Except, this machine was designed to consume children and produce money. On the second entry, night 3, I replaced the recorder's micro SD card. Moreno had provided 2 spares, each capable of holding 48 hours of continuous audio at compressed bitrate. I swapped the card in 11 seconds, a procedure I practiced 17 times in the motel room using a deck of playing cards as a stand-in. The original card went into a waterproof case strapped to my ankle. I carried it out of the shaft, drove to the Forest Service station, and left it in a magnetic lockbox beneath the building's eastern downspout. Moreno retrieved it before dawn. We never met in person during those 10 days. Every exchange was dead drop. Every communication through the prepaid phone. Every message deleted within 60 seconds of reading. By night 5, the recordings had captured 43 distinct conversations. Moreno's forensic audio team in Charleston categorized them into 3 tiers. Tier 1. Garrett Cross, issuing direct instructions to staff regarding child labor schedules, wake times, task assignments, caloric restrictions for children who failed to meet quotas. Tier 2. Phone calls between Cross and an accountant in Roanoke discussing revenue distribution, insurance claim timelines, and what they called replacement. Cycling the rotation of children out of one facility and into another to reset enrollment records and avoid state inspection triggers. Tier 3, the recordings that changed everything, were 4 calls between Nadine Voss and Garrett Cross, conducted between 11:00 p.m. and midnight, when Nadine believed Warren Caldwell was still in Montana reviewing foundation specs on a project that no longer existed. I listened to one of those calls. Moreno played it through the prepaid phone speaker while I sat in the motel parking lot on night 7. Nadine's voice was calm, organized, the same tone she used when reviewing her nonprofit's quarterly budgets at the kitchen table. She discussed Micah by a code name, the new intake. She confirmed that his ADHD medication had been confiscated upon arrival as per protocol because medicated children, she explained, were harder to control during early morning labor shifts. She referenced the 2 insurance policies by their activation numbers. She asked Garrett whether the father had made any further contact attempts, and Garrett replied that Deputy Suttles had handled the situation and that the 60-day integration window would expire before any legal challenge could gain traction. Then Nadine said something that made me turn off the engine because my hands were shaking and I did not trust them on the wheel. She said, "After the 14 months, we dissolve the LLC, file the claim, and move to the Carolina property. He doesn't need to be part of that equation. Me, the architect who designed cages for a living, reduced to a variable in a spreadsheet formula, and file the claim, could only mean one thing when spoken alongside $2 million life insurance policies on a 12-year-old boy. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes. I did not call Moreno. I did not drive. I breathed in 4-second cycles, and I thought about the first time Micah held a pencil. He was 3. And he drew a rectangle and called it a house. And I told him every house starts with a rectangle, and he looked at me as though I had handed him the key to the entire world. That boy was sleeping in a room with no heat, no medication, and a padlock on the outside of the door, and the woman who put him there was planning a timeline that ended with his name on a claim form. On night 8, I made my 3rd entry. This time I reached the director's office. The door was unlocked. A detail I attributed to Garrett Cross's arrogance, the confidence of a man who believed his perimeter was sealed. The office contained a steel desk, a filing cabinet, a laptop connected to an external hard drive, and a corkboard pinned with operational schedules. I photographed everything. 47 images in 6 minutes. The schedules confirmed what the audio had suggested. Children were woken at 4:30 a.m., assigned to agricultural or maintenance labor until 7:00 a.m., given 30 minutes for breakfast, then moved to a room labeled classroom, where a single unqualified staff member supervised worksheets photocopied from outdated textbooks. Afternoon shifts resumed at 1:00 p.m. and ran until 5:00 p.m. Total labor: 7 hours per day, 6 days per week, for children aged 9 to 15. In the filing cabinet's bottom drawer, behind a row of hanging folders labeled by child's last name, I found a leather portfolio. Inside were 5 sealed envelopes. Each envelope bore a child's first name in Nadine's handwriting. The third envelope said Micah. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten letter from my son. Dad, I count the days. Today is 10. They took my pills. The food is not enough. There is a boy named Caleb in room 6 who shakes at night. I hear him through the wall. I keep telling him stories about bridges so he stops shaking. I told him about the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and he asked if it goes all the way to the other side. I said yes. He said he wants to go to the other side. Dad, I want to go to the other side too. Please come. I folded the letter and placed it inside my coveralls against my chest. I did not put it back in the envelope. I did not leave it in a drawer where a man who locked children in basements could hold it as leverage. That letter belonged to me. It had always belonged to me. I exited the shaft at 3:41 a.m., drove to the Forest Service station, and placed the micro SD card in the lockbox. Then I called Moreno on the prepaid phone. Not a text. A call. I have 47 photographs of operational documents, labor schedules, and a filing system organized by child. I have a letter written by my son confirming confiscated medication, inadequate nutrition, and the presence of at least one other child in isolation. I have 10 days of audio. I have 4 recorded calls implicating Nadine Voss in financial conspiracy, insurance fraud, and what I believe is a planned harm timeline against a minor. Moreno was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "The ground is ready. I'm filing for the warrant at 9 a.m. I hung up. I sat in the car and held my son's letter against my chest, and I waited for the sun to come up over the Allegheny ridgeline, because for the first time in 10 days, I believed I was going to bring him home." The warrant was signed at 11:47 a.m. by a federal magistrate in the Southern District of West Virginia. Moreno called me from a gas station payphone, not the prepaid, not his bureau line, a payphone, and read me one sentence. "We're moving tonight. Be at the pump station at midnight. Do not bring anything you are not willing to lose." I spent the afternoon in the motel room, doing what I have done before every critical, structural inspection of my career. I memorized the building, not the brochure version, not the satellite image, but the real Cedar Ridge Academy, as I had mapped it across 4 nighttime entries. I closed my eyes and walked the shaft in my mind. 12-degree decline, 40 meters. Level section, 70 meters. Lateral duct junction, 1 meter square. Vertical drop, 6 feet, into the mechanical room. Door to hallway. 40 feet east, director's office. 40 feet west, 7 rooms, 2 padlocked. I knew the distance between each fluorescent light cage, 12 feet. I knew the location of every camera Curtis had marked. 4 exterior, 2 interior, none in the basement. I knew the breaker panel, the 8 circuits, the red tape switch on circuit 8 that I had never tested. I knew the building the way I knew my own drawings. And tonight, I would walk someone else through it. At 11:40 p.m. I parked the sedan behind the hemlocks. The October air had dropped into the mid-30s, and the ground fog was dense enough to erase the fire road beyond 20 feet. I wore the same coveralls, the same steel-toed boots, the same respirator around my neck. But this time I carried nothing except the prepaid phone and a 2-way radio Moreno had left in the Forest Service lockbox that afternoon. At midnight, headlights appeared on the fire road. Not one vehicle. 3. They parked in a staggered line behind my sedan. Engines off, lights killed in unison. Doors opened and closed with the disciplined quiet of people who had done this before. Moreno emerged from the lead vehicle. Behind him, 7 figures in dark tactical gear, FBI tactical team. No agency markings visible, weapons holstered, communications earpieces already active. One of them was a woman carrying a breaching kit, hydraulic spreader, bolt cutters rated for hardened steel, and a Halligan bar. Another carried a trauma bag with a red cross on the strap. The 8th figure was not tactical. He was Curtis Hale. Curtis wore civilian clothes, jeans, a canvas jacket, work boots. He looked 10 years older than the man went. Limps through binoculars, nodding at my truck from the kitchen 11 days ago. His hands were steady, but his jaw was clenched in the way of someone who had made a decision he could not unmake. Moreno introduced no one. He spread the campus map, Curtis's map, the one Mabel Harwick had given me at the library, on the hood of the lead vehicle, and held a red-filtered flashlight over it. "Mr. Caldwell enters first," Moreno said. "Through the ventilation shaft. He opens the mechanical room door from inside and confirms the basement hallway is clear. Once confirmed, the tactical team enters through the shaft in two-person increments. Mr. Hale enters last and provides real-time identification of staff quarters, key locations, and any changes to the layout since his last shift 3 days ago." Curtis spoke for the first time. His voice was low, Appalachian, careful. "Mercer sleeps in the staff cabin, closest to the main building. Light sleeper. Keeps a shotgun in a duffel beside his cot. Cross sleeps on the second floor, northeast bedroom. Door unlocked. The children will be in rooms 1 through 6. Rooms 4 and 6 are padlocked. The others are closed, but not locked." "How many children total?" Moreno asked. 8. 3 in shared rooms on the first floor. 5 in the basement. Curtis paused. 2 of the 5 haven't spoken in over a week. No one responded to that. The fog thickened around us, and the only sound was the creek running fast below the ridge. Moreno looked at me. "You've made this crawl 4 times. How long to reach the mechanical room?" 31 minutes. Add 5 for each additional person unfamiliar with the angle changes. Can you cut it to 25? If I don't count my breaths, yes. That was not a joke. But Moreno almost smiled. He folded the map and handed it to the woman with the breaching kit. At 12:34 I entered the shaft. The crawl was different this time, not because the shaft had changed, but because I could hear the person behind me, Agent Number 1. A man whose name I never learned. Followed at a 10-foot interval, moving with a competence that told me he had done confined space entries before. His breathing was controlled, rhythmic, professional. Mine was 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. The way it had been every time, because the walls did not care that I had done this before. They were still 31 inches apart, and they still wanted to close. I reached the mechanical room in 27 minutes, 2 minutes faster than my best time. I opened the door 2 inches and listened. The HVAC drone, the water heater clank, the particular silence of children trained not to make sound. I keyed the two-way radio once. Click. The signal for clear. Over the next 18 minutes, the tactical team filtered through the shaft in pairs. Each pair dropped into the mechanical room, oriented against the map, and held position. Curtis came last, breathing harder than the agents. His canvas jacket scraped along one shoulder from the lateral duct. He looked at the hallway through the cracked door, and his face did something I recognized, the expression of a man seeing a familiar place through honest eyes for the first time. At 1:19 a.m., Moreno gave the go signal. 3 clicks on the radio. The team split into 2 elements. Element 1, 4 agents, plus the breaching specialist, moved west down the hallway toward the locked rooms. Element 2, Moreno, 2 agents. And Curtis moved east toward the stairwell leading to the main floor, the staff quarters, and Garrett Cross's second-floor bedroom. I went with Element 1. I was not armed. I was not trained. I was a 57-year-old man in coveralls who designed buildings for a living. But I knew which doors were locked, and I knew the sound my son's breathing made through a steel door, and that was more than anyone else in that hallway could say. The breaching specialist reached room 4 first. She examined the padlock for 3 seconds, positioned the bolt cutters, and severed the shackle in a single compression. The lock hit the concrete floor with a sound that carried down the hallway like a gunshot in a cathedral. She pulled the door open. The room was 8 by 10 feet. Concrete walls, concrete floor, No window, no heating vent. A thin mattress on a steel frame cot. A plastic bucket in the corner. A wool blanket folded at the foot of the cot with military corners, the kind of corners a child learns to make when the consequence for failure is losing the blanket entirely. Micah was sitting upright on the cot. Not sleeping. Sitting with his back against the wall and his knees drawn to his chest and his eyes open, staring at the door as though he had been waiting for it to open for exactly this long. He was thinner than the boy I had seen hauling crates 11 days ago. His hair was longer. His wrists had red marks that I catalogued automatically ligature patterns. Repeated restraint. 2 to 3 weeks old. He looked at me. He did not cry. He did not move. He said one word. Dad. I crossed the room in 2 steps. And I held him. And I did not let go. I held my son for 13 seconds. I know because the breaching specialist behind me was counting into her earpiece, a standard procedure for room clearance timing that I was never supposed to hear, but heard anyway. 13 seconds. That is how long a father gets to hold a boy he almost lost before the operation continues moving. Sir, we need to clear the other rooms. I released Micah but kept one hand on his shoulder. His collarbone was sharp beneath the gray cotton shirt. Sharper than any 12-year-old's collarbone should be. I could feel the architecture of him. The way I feel the load-bearing structure of a building through my palm when I press it against a wall. He was standing, but the structure had been compromised. Can you walk? I asked. He nodded. Then he said, Caleb is in room 6. Get Caleb first. Not get me out. Not I want to go home. His first complete sentence in 11 days of captivity was about another child. I looked at the breaching specialist. She was already moving. Room 6's padlock was identical to room 4's same brand. Same 5-pin tumbler. Same single compression on the bolt cutters. The door opened and the smell hit before the light did. Urine, sweat, and something metallic that I later learned was dried blood from a split lip that had not been treated in 5 days. Caleb Renner was lying on his side on a cot identical to Micah's. Facing the wall, knees pulled tight, shaking in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the cold. He was 9 years old. He weighed 61 pounds. When the breaching specialist said, FBI, you're safe, he did not turn around. Micah walked past me into the room. He crouched beside the cot and said, Caleb, it's Micah. My dad came. We're going to the other side. The other side. The phrase from the letter, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, the question a 9-year-old asked through a wall in the dark. Does it go all the way to the other side? Micah had answered yes. And now he was keeping that promise in a way that bridges never could. Caleb turned. His eyes found Micah first, then me, then the tactical agent in the doorway. He did not speak. He reached out one hand, and Micah took it, and they walked into the hallway together. And I followed them, because I did not trust my voice to say anything that would not break. The remaining 3 basement rooms were unlocked. Each contained a child. Room 1. A 14-year-old girl named Darcy, who stood at attention when the door opened, hands at her sides, eyes forward, as though inspection had arrived early. Room 2. Twin brothers. 11. Who held each other's wrists and asked if they were in trouble. Room 3. A 13-year-old boy named Isaiah, who carried a composition notebook filled with tally marks, 1 for each day. He had reached 47. 5 children from the basement. 3 more from the first-floor shared rooms, retrieved by a secondary tactical element that entered through the main building service entrance after Element 2 secured the staff quarters. 8 children total, exactly as Curtis had reported. Ages 9 to 15. Combined time in the facility, approximately 14 months for the longest resident, 11 days for the shortest. My son was the shortest. The trauma medic set up a triage area in the camp's dining hall, the same room where Curtis Hale had prepared meals and watched children carry crates in the dark. Each child received a thermal blanket, a bottle of water, and a preliminary medical assessment. The medic spoke in a tone I recognized from pediatric emergency protocols. Calm, direct, no diminutives, no false promises. She told each child exactly what was happening and exactly what would happen next. Caleb Renner did not release Micah's hand during his entire assessment. While the children were being processed, the building above me was being dismantled. I heard it through the dining hall ceiling: footsteps, voices, the sharp declarative language of federal agents executing a search warrant. Element 2 had reached the second floor at 1:23 a.m. 4 minutes after the go signal. Garrett Cross was detained in his bedroom, hands zip-tied in front, wearing a white undershirt and boxer shorts. He said nothing during the arrest. According to Moreno's debrief 3 days later, Cross sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall and did not ask a single question. Not about the warrant, not about the charges, not about the children in his basement. The silence of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind and decided that silence was the only architecture that could not be dismantled. Mercer was a different matter. The counselor Curtis had warned about light sleeper. Shotgun in a duffel was found in the staff cabin exactly as described. When agents entered, Mercer reached for the duffel. The lead agent's boot pinned the bag to the floor before Mercer's fingers closed on the zipper. Mercer was face down and cuffed in under 8 seconds. He spoke continuously during the arrest, a stream of legal threats and jurisdictional challenges that suggested he had done this before or had been told what to say if it ever happened. The shotgun was a 12-gauge pump, loaded, safety off. It had been stored 6 feet from a cabin that sat 40 yards from a building full of sleeping children. The search of Cross's office yielded what Moreno called the complete library. The laptop and external hard drive contained financial records spanning 31 months. The filing cabinet produced enrollment files for 23 children, 15 more than currently housed, meaning 8 had been cycled through the facility and transferred or released without any state notification. The corkboard held operational schedules dating back to the facility's opening. And in the bottom drawer, beneath the leather portfolio where I had found the letters, agents recovered a prepaid phone, not the one Moreno gave me, but Cross's own, containing text exchanges with Nadine Voss, the accountant in Roanoke, and a name that had not appeared in any prior conversation: Vivian Cross. Vivian Cross. Garrett Cross's wife. A woman whose name appeared on the incorporation documents for Ridgeline Youth Development Partners as the registered agent in Delaware, and whose signature appeared on 14 of the 23 enrollment contracts, including Micah's supplementary rider, the one that authorized experiential leadership activities. On page 10, the operation that began as a father crawling through a ventilation shaft had uncovered a network with 3 facilities, 23 documented child victims, $1.4 million in traced financial transfers, and a conspiracy that extended from a basement in West Virginia to a law office in Charlotte to a shell company in Wilmington. At 4:17 a.m., Moreno entered the dining hall. He looked at the 8 children wrapped in thermal blankets, at the medic checking Caleb Renner's split lip, at Micah sitting on a bench with my jacket around his shoulders and his eyes tracking every person who entered the room. The eidetic memory, working even now, cataloging, recording, building a structure from the chaos the way his father built structures from blueprints. Moreno placed a clear evidence bag on the table in front of me. Inside was the micro SD card from the final recorder swap, the one containing the 43 conversations, including the 4 calls between Nadine and Garrett, that mapped the entire conspiracy. 43 recordings, he said. Every single one admissible. Every single one, because you crawled 280 meters in the dark. He paused. We still need Nadine. She's not here. We have a team en route to Lewisburg. I looked at my son. He was watching me the way he watched me when he was 3, and drew a rectangle and called it a house, waiting for me to tell him what comes next. I know, I said. I'll be there. We drove to Lewisburg in 2 vehicles. Moreno rode with me in the sedan. 2 agents followed in an unmarked SUV. Micah stayed at Cedar Ridge under the medic's care and the protection of the remaining tactical team. A decision I made in the parking lot at 4:31 a.m. while my son watched me through the dining hall window. Leaving him again was the second hardest thing I did that night. The hardest was knowing that the woman we were driving to arrest had kissed him goodnight the evening before she signed the enrollment contract. The drive was 112 miles. Moreno did not speak for the first 40. He sat in the passenger seat reviewing documents on a tablet, the screen light carving his face into angles that made him look older than mid-30s. At mile 41, he closed the tablet. "I need to tell you something before we get there," he said. "Nadine Voss is not her legal name. It's her third identity. Birth name: Nadine Garrett. She changed it to Nadine Cross after her first marriage to a man named Boyd Cross, Garrett Cross's cousin, not his brother. That marriage lasted 19 months and ended when Boyd filed for an annulment citing fraud. She then became Nadine Voss, using a legal name change, filed in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. In 2019, the nonprofit she told you she ran, Bright Futures Appalachian Youth, was dissolved by the state 8 months before you met her. It never served a single child. It existed to establish a professional history that would look credible on a background check. I kept my eyes on the road. Route 219 South. 2 lanes, no streetlights, the headlights cutting through fog that had followed us from the mountains. "How long have you known this?" I asked. 5 weeks. The financial trail led us to the Mecklenburg filing. We cross-referenced with the Delaware Incorporation for Ridgeline. Same notary on both documents. That's when we knew the financial architect wasn't just connected to Cross, she was the origin point. The origin point, not an accessory. Not a co-conspirator pulled into her brother-in-law's operation. The designer, the person who drew the blueprint, identified the vulnerabilities, selected the materials, and poured the foundation. I had spent 26 years designing structures that held dangerous people. I had married one who designed structures that consumed children, and I had not seen a single load-bearing wall. Moreno continued. The insurance policies were her design. The enrollment contracts were her template Whitfield, and Carlisle drafted the language, but the structure came from a document she authored in 2020 for a program in Harlan County that never opened. The Delaware LLC was her incorporation. Cross ran the daily operations. But the financial engineering, the layered accounts, the replacement cycling, the timing of transfers to avoid reporting thresholds, that's forensic accounting level work. She studied it. She built it. Cross couldn't have done it alone. "And the children?" I said. "Whose idea were the children?" Moreno was quiet for 6 seconds. "We believe she identified the model. Residential youth programs operate in a regulatory gap. State oversight varies. Federal jurisdiction is limited, and parents who enroll children in these programs have already signed away most of their intervention rights through contracts designed to look therapeutic. She recognized that gap the way a structural engineer recognizes a fault line. She built on it. We reached Lewisburg at 6:52 a.m. The house, my house, the one I had purchased 18 months ago, with a down payment drawn from 26 years of federal salary, sat on a half-acre lot on Courtney Drive, a quiet street lined with sugar maples that were dropping the last of their October leaves. The porch light was on. The garage door was closed. Nadine's silver Volvo was parked in the driveway, positioned at the exact angle she always used, rear bumper aligned with the second expansion joint in the concrete, a habit I once found endearing, and now understood as the precision of a person who controlled every variable in her environment. Moreno positioned the SUV at the end of the driveway. He and the 2 agents approached the front door. I stayed at the sedan, 50 feet back, as instructed. My role was witness, not participant. Moreno had been explicit. "You are the victim's father. You are a cooperating witness. You do not speak to her, touch her, or enter the residence until we have cleared it." Moreno knocked. 3 measured strikes, the kind that carry authority through solid wood. 12 seconds passed. The porch light turned off, a deliberate act, not a timer. Then the door opened. Nadine stood in the doorway wearing the gray linen robe I had bought her for her birthday. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was composed, not startled, not confused, but arranged in the expression of a woman who had opened her front door expecting a delivery and received an inconvenience. She looked at Moreno's badge, then at the two agents flanking him, then past all three of them, across the driveway. To me, our eyes met for 13 seconds. I counted because I could not help counting. The same way I counted breaths in the shaft. The same way the breaching specialist counted time in Micah's room. The same way my son counted days on a wall he could not see. 13 seconds in which I searched for something in her face. Guilt, fear, surprise, the faintest fracture in the architecture of the woman I thought I had married. I found nothing. Her expression was load-tested. It held. Then she looked away from me, not down, not aside, but back to Moreno. As though I was a variable she had already removed from the equation. Nadine Voss, Moreno said. Also known as Nadine Garrett. Also known as Nadine Cross. You are under arrest pursuant to a federal warrant issued by the Southern District of West Virginia for wire fraud. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Conspiracy to exploit minors. Insurance fraud and endangerment of a minor. You have the right to remain silent. She remained silent. Not because she was exercising a right, but because silence was structural. She had built her entire operation inside it, inside the quiet spaces between contracts and signatures, between bedtime kisses and enrollment forms, between I love your son and the new intake. Silence was her material, the way concrete was mine. The agents handcuffed her in the doorway. She did not resist. She stepped over the threshold in house slippers, her wrists bound in front, and walked to the SUV with a posture so controlled it looked rehearsed. Perhaps it was. Perhaps she had practiced this the way she practiced everything. The nonprofit that never served a child. The marriage that was an infiltration. The motherhood that was a placement strategy. As she passed the sedan, she slowed. Not stopped, slowed. The way a person slows past a window display that no longer interests them. She did not look at me. But she spoke. One sentence, delivered to the air in front of her, quiet enough that only I could hear. You were never supposed to come back early. 5 words that collapsed 16 months of marriage into a single structural failure. She had accounted for my travel schedule, my project timelines, my habit of trusting her highlighted signature tabs. She had accounted for the 60-day integration window, the restricted contact policy, the deputy who followed a script. She had accounted for everything except a foundation fault in Billings, Montana, that sent me home 3 weeks ahead of schedule. I did not respond. I watched the SUV door close. I watched the vehicle reverse down the driveway. I watched the taillights disappear down Courtney Drive, past the sugar maples, into a morning fog that was beginning to thin. Then I walked into my house, sat at the kitchen table where she used to review her quarterly budgets, and I called the medic at Cedar Ridge. Put my son on the phone, I said. Micah's voice came through the line. Small and careful. The voice of a boy who had learned to measure every word. Dad? Is it over? It's over, I said. I'm coming to get you. I brought Micah home on a Thursday. He walked through the front door of the Lewisburg house carrying nothing, no bag, no belongings, no jacket, because everything he had owned at Cedar Ridge had been seized as evidence, or was never his to begin with. The gray cotton uniform went into a medical waste bag at the triage station. His shoes, a pair of canvas slip-ons, 2 sizes too small. Soles worn through at the ball of the left foot, were photographed, catalogued, and placed in a clear evidence bag labeled with his case number. My 12-year-old son came home in borrowed clothes from a federal trauma medic and a pair of socks I bought at a gas station in Marlinton. He stood in the hallway for a long time. Not moving, not speaking. Just looking at the house, the way a person looks at a room they remember from a dream, but cannot trust to be real. His eyes moved in a pattern: left wall, ceiling, floor, right wall, door, and I realized he was checking for cameras. The eidetic memory that had once memorized bridge specifications and state capitals was now cataloging threat vectors in his own home. "There are no cameras," I said. He looked at me. "I know." But he checked the hallway light fixture anyway, standing on his toes and running one finger along the top edge of the housing. Then he walked to his bedroom, opened the door, and stood at the threshold without entering. The curtains Nadine had hung were still there, white cotton with small blue anchors, chosen during a shopping trip I was told about but did not attend. Micah looked at them for 11 seconds, then pulled them down with both hands, rod and all, and dropped them on the floor. "I want different ones," he said. That was the most he spoke that first day. The next 72 hours were administrative. Child Protective Services assigned a caseworker named Ruth Egan, who arrived with forms, a preliminary interview protocol, and a calm professionalism that I appreciated more than any words of comfort. A pediatrician at Greenbrier Valley Medical Center conducted a full assessment. Micah had lost 9 pounds in 11 days. His ADHD medication had been withheld for the entire period, producing a rebound effect that manifested as severe insomnia, appetite disruption, and a hypervigilance that the pediatrician distinguished carefully from anxiety disorder. The ligature marks on his wrists were consistent with repeated restraint, using a fabric strap, not handcuffs, not zip ties, but something deliberately chosen to leave marks that could be explained as friction from outdoor activities. Calculated. Even the abuse had been designed. I requested copies of every medical document. I placed them in a manila folder alongside the photographs Moreno had released from the office search, the enrollment contract Owen Brightwell had annotated, and the original of Micah's letter, the one I had carried against my chest through the ventilation shaft. The folder went into a fireproof lockbox I installed in the bedroom closet. Evidence has a weight that paper alone cannot explain. On the 4th day, Moreno called. The arraignment was scheduled. Garrett Cross, Nadine Voss, and Vivian Cross would appear before the federal magistrate in the Southern District of West Virginia the following Monday. A 4th defendant, Russell Yates, the accountant in Roanoke, had been arrested the previous afternoon at his office. He offered cooperation within 90 minutes of being read his rights, a speed that Moreno described as structurally informative. Yates had maintained the financial records for all 3 facilities. His cooperation meant the prosecution now had an inside view of the money, and money, in federal conspiracy cases, is the architecture that holds everything else together. Mercer, the counselor, with the shotgun was charged separately under state jurisdiction: unlawful possession of a firearm on educational premises, assault on a minor, and 4 counts of child endangerment. His case would not intersect with the federal prosecution, but the charges ensured he would not return to any facility where children were present. Moreno also confirmed what Curtis Hale's cooperation had already suggested. Curtis would not be charged. His role as the inside informant, the map, the anonymous email, the information about Mercer's sleeping habits and weapon had been formalized into a cooperation agreement that preceded the raid. Curtis Hale had been hired as a cook at Cedar Ridge 14 months earlier. Within 3 months, he understood what the facility was. Within 6, he began documenting. The map he drew was his 7th attempt. 6 earlier versions had been destroyed when he judged the risk of discovery too high. He was not a hero in the way that word is typically used. He was a man who cooked breakfast for children he knew were being exploited and chose, eventually, to draw a map instead of another meal. On the 5th day, I drove to Owen Brightwell's office in Marlinton. The lawyer who had read 16 pages of an enrollment contract and called the FBI sat behind the same desk where he had dissected the document, wearing the same reading glasses on the same chain, drinking coffee from the same ceramic mug. He did not stand when I entered. He gestured to the chair across from him. "I suppose you're here to thank me," he said. "I'm here to hire you." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm a small-town attorney, Mr. Caldwell. I handle property disputes and estate planning. The case you're describing will require, I need someone who reads the fine print. You read it when no one asked you to. You called the FBI when no one expected you to. I don't need a federal litigator. I need the person who saw what was hidden in 16 pages and acted on it. Brightwell removed his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth he kept in his breast pocket, and replaced them. I'll take the civil case. Custody, divorce, asset recovery. The criminal prosecution is the Bureau's work, but the civil architecture unwinding the marriage, protecting your son's rights, recovering what she took that I can build. Civil architecture. He used the word without knowing it was the only language I understood. On the 7th day, I visited Caleb Renner. Moreno had connected me with Caleb's grandparents, Frank and Margaret Renner, a retired postal worker and a retired school librarian in Beckley, 60 miles south. Caleb had been placed with them upon discharge from the facility. His parents were not in the picture. His father was incarcerated in Ohio on unrelated charges, and his mother had signed the Cedar Ridge enrollment contract under circumstances that the Bureau was still investigating. The Renners lived in a single-story house with a chain-link fence and a vegetable garden that had been put to bed for winter. Frank met me at the gate. He shook my hand with both of his and held it for a moment longer than politeness required. "Your boy told our boy stories about bridges," Frank said. "Caleb won't stop talking about the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. He wants to see it." "I'll take him," I said. "When this is done, I'll take both of them." Caleb was sitting on the living room couch with a coloring book open to a page he had not colored. He looked up when I entered and studied my face with the careful attention of a child who has learned to read adults for danger. "You're Micah's dad," he said. "Not a question." "I am." He said, "You build things that keep bad people inside." "That's right." Caleb looked down at the coloring book, then back at me. "Can you build something that keeps bad people outside?" I did not have an answer for that. I still don't. But I sat beside him on that couch and I stayed for 2 hours. And when I left, Frank Renner walked me to the gate and said, "That boy hasn't let anyone sit next to him since he came home. You're the first." I drove back to Lewisburg with the window down and the October air sharp against my face, and I thought about what Caleb had asked. I had spent 26 years building structures to contain people. Walls, locks, sight lines, dead zones, perimeters calibrated to the inch. I had never once designed a building whose purpose was to protect the people inside it from the world outside. Maybe it was time to start. The federal trial began on a Monday in February, 4 months after the raid, in courtroom 3B of the Southern District of West Virginia in Charleston. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting recessed behind acoustic tiles, 16 rows of gallery seating. I had walked past this building 11 times during construction reviews of the adjacent federal structure, but had never entered it. I had reviewed the HVAC drawings for the neighboring building in 2014. The irony was precise. I had helped design the air people breathed in this complex. And now I was sitting inside it, watching the woman I married try to breathe through what my evidence had built around her. The prosecution was led by Assistant United States Attorney Diana Solano, a woman in her mid-40s who spoke in paragraphs, the way engineers speak in load calculations, every sentence supporting the one above it, every clause bearing weight. Her opening statement lasted 37 minutes and displayed a timeline of 47 entries, spanning March 2020 to October 2024, from the incorporation of Ridgeline Youth Development Partners in Delaware to the night a 57-year-old prison architect placed a recorder in a basement hallway. Every entry was sourced to a document, a recording, or a witness statement. The timeline was built the way I would build a structure. Foundation first, load. Bearing walls second, roof last. The defense strategy was separation. Each defendant had independent counsel, each attempting to isolate their client from the conspiracy's design. Garrett Cross's attorney argued he was an operational manager, following blueprints drawn by someone else. Vivian Cross's attorney characterized her as a clerical functionary who signed documents without understanding their contents. And Nadine's attorney, Gerald Fisk, a Richmond defense lawyer retained privately from an account whose funding source became its own evidentiary issue, argued that Nadine Voss had married a federal employee in good faith, and her involvement was limited to occasional administrative assistance. Good faith. The phrase sat in the courtroom like a crack in a foundation wall, invisible to anyone who did not know where to look, catastrophic to anyone who did. Phase 1 was financial. Russell Yates, cooperating under a plea agreement that reduced his exposure from 47 years to 6 to 8, testified for 2 days. He had maintained parallel books for Ridgeline, one for state reporting showing tuition revenue and educational expenditures consistent with a licensed program, and one for internal use showing the actual flow of money. The internal ledger documented $1.4 million across 31 months. Revenue sources included parental tuition, falsified state subsidies, and insurance reimbursements for therapeutic services never delivered. Disbursements included $381,000 to Cross's operational accounts, $227,000 to Whitfield and Carlisle, $94,000 to a catering supplier providing food at one-third the caloric standard for minors, and $412,000 to Nadine's personal accounts, distributed across 3 banks in amounts calibrated to stay below the $10,000 currency transaction report threshold. On the second day, under cross-examination, Fisk asked whether Yates had ever personally witnessed Nadine direct a transaction. Yates adjusted his bifocals, opened a binder to a tabbed page, and read aloud an email dated the 14th of June 2023 from Nadine's personal account. The attachment contained wire instructions for 4 transfers totaling $127,000, each routed through a different intermediary. The subject line was Q. 2. Rebalancing. The body was one sentence. Process per the usual structure. Confirm when complete. Fisk did not ask another question. Phase 2 was operational. Curtis Hale took the stand on day 4 in a suit that did not fit shoulders too wide, sleeves too long, speaking in the same low Appalachian cadence I remembered from the night of the raid. He described the 4:30 a.m. wake-ups, the labor assignments, the caloric restrictions, the isolation protocol. He described Mercer's enforcement fabric restraints, bedding removal in cold weather, 24-hour isolation in rooms with no heat. He named all 8 children from memory, and when he reached Caleb Renner's name, his voice changed in a way that made the court reporter pause. Solano asked why he had waited 14 months. Curtis looked at his hands and said, "Because every day I told myself tomorrow would be the day. And every night I went to bed knowing I had said the same thing yesterday. It took me 14 months to stop lying to myself. I am not proud of that number. But I am here now." I watched the jury, 7 women, 5 men, and saw the same expression on 11 of 12 faces. People recalculating the weight of a structure they thought they understood. Phase 3 was the recordings. Moreno authenticated the 43 audio files on day 6. Chain of custody. Documented. Through every swap, every dead drop, every timestamp corroborated by the prepaid phone's transmission logs. Solano played 4 recordings. Cross instructing staff to reduce meals for children who missed hauling quotas. Cross and Yates discussing insurance reimbursement timing, and the 2 recordings that mattered most, Nadine's late-night calls from the director's office. The jury heard her refer to my son as the new intake. They heard her confirm the confiscation of his medication. They heard her discuss the 14-month timeline and the LLC dissolution. And they heard the sentence that had made me pull my truck to the roadside in October. After the 14 months, we dissolve the LLC, file the claim, and move to the Carolina property. He doesn't need to be part of that equation. Fisk objected on Fourth Amendment grounds, arguing the recorder's initial placement constituted unreasonable search. The magistrate reviewed the warrant application, the supporting affidavits, and Moreno's investigation timeline, and overruled the objection in less time than it takes to read this paragraph. On day 8, the prosecution rested. I was never called to testify. Solano's strategy was deliberate. The evidence spoke through documents, recordings, and cooperating witnesses. The father's voice was unnecessary when the father's recordings had already said everything. I sat in the gallery for 8 days and watched the structure I had helped build evidence by evidence document by document, recording by recording, rise around the four people who had tried to build a machine out of children and money. The architecture held. The defense phase lasted 3 days. It should have lasted longer. But the architecture of denial requires materials that the prosecution had already removed from the building. Garrett Cross did not testify. His attorney called 2 character witnesses, a former employer and a church deacon from Elkins, who described Cross as a disciplined, community-oriented man. Neither witness had visited Cedar Ridge Academy. Neither had met a single child enrolled there. Their testimony was a facade with nothing behind it, and the jury's faces told me they recognized the hollow framing the way I recognized drywall hung over a missing stud. Vivian Cross testified. She spoke softly, her hands folded in her lap, and described her role as purely administrative filing documents, maintaining the LLC's registered agent status in Delaware, signing papers her husband placed in front of her. Under cross-examination, Solano presented 14 enrollment contracts bearing Vivian's signature, each accompanied by a supplementary rider authorizing experiential leadership activities. Solano asked Vivian to read the rider's language aloud. Vivian read 3 sentences, paused, and said she had never read them before signing. "You signed 14 contracts authorizing child labor without reading the language?" Solano asked. "I trusted my husband." Solano placed a 15th document on the projector, an email from Vivian to the Whitfield and Carlisle paralegal, requesting revisions to the rider's indemnification clause. The email was dated 2 weeks before the first enrollment contract was signed. It referenced specific page numbers, specific clauses, specific liability language. Trust does not request indemnification revisions. The architecture of Vivian's testimony collapsed in a single exhibit, and I watched it happen. The way I watch a stress test exceed a beam's rated capacity, not with surprise, but with the recognition of an outcome that the numbers had already predicted. Nadine did not testify. Fisk rested her defense without calling a single witness. No character testimony, no alternative narrative, no explanation for 3 identities, a dissolved nonprofit, $412,000 in structured deposits, or a recorded voice discussing insurance claims on a 12-year-old boy. The silence was strategic. Fisk calculated that anything Nadine said would provide the prosecution more surface area than it could possibly remove. He was correct in his mathematics. But silence, as I had learned in the basement of Cedar Ridge Academy, carries its own testimony. The jury had heard Nadine's voice on 4 recordings. They did not need to hear it again from the witness stand. They had already measured it against the voice of a woman who called a child the new intake and calculated a 14-month timeline that ended with a dissolution and a claim. Closing arguments consumed day 11. Solano's closing was 42 minutes long and structured around a single metaphor that I suspect she chose knowing exactly who was sitting in the gallery. She called the conspiracy a building. She described the foundation Nadine's financial design. The load-bearing walls Cross's operational management. The electrical system, Yates's accounting. The legal insulation Whitfield and Carlisle's contracts. And the locked rooms, 8 of them, in a basement with no windows, no heat, and padlocks on the outside of every door. This building was not an accident, Solano said. It was designed, it was financed, it was staffed, it was maintained, and it was filled with children who had no voice, no advocate, and no key. The defendants did not stumble into this conspiracy. They drew the blueprints, poured the concrete, and locked the doors. The only thing they did not design was the man who crawled 280 meters through a ventilation shaft to unlock them. Fisk's closing for Nadine lasted 19 minutes and argued reasonable doubt on the conspiracy charges, that the recordings could be interpreted as administrative discussions rather than criminal directives, that the financial transfers were consistent with legitimate business operations, that 3 legal name changes were not evidence of criminal intent. He spoke competently. He built his argument on the assumption that language is ambiguous and intent is invisible. He was not wrong about language, but he was wrong about the jury. The jury deliberated for 9 hours across 2 days. On the second afternoon, the foreperson, a woman in her 50s, who had taken notes on a yellow legal pad throughout the trial, stood and delivered the verdicts. Garrett Cross, guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to exploit minors, child endangerment, insurance fraud. Vivian Cross, guilty on wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and 3 counts of child endangerment. Not guilty on insurance fraud, the jury concluded she had not been directly involved in the policy activations. Russell Yates, guilty on wire fraud and conspiracy, with the cooperation agreement noted for sentencing consideration. Nadine Voss, also known as Nadine Garrett, also known as Nadine Cross, guilty on all counts, every charge. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to exploit minors, insurance fraud, endangerment of a minor, and 1 additional count that Solano had added during the trial's second week based on evidence recovered from Cross's prepaid phone. Interstate transportation for illegal activity, a charge that carried its own mandatory minimum and connected the West Virginia operation to the facilities in Kentucky and North Carolina. I did not react when the verdicts were read. I sat in the 3rd row of the gallery with my hands on my knees, and I listened to each word, the way I listened to a structural integrity report after a load test. Not for emotion, but for confirmation that the numbers held. They held. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Garrett Cross received 22 years in federal prison. Vivian Cross received 8 years. Russell Yates received 4 years. Reduced from the recommended 6 to 8, based on his substantial cooperation. Mercer, tried separately in state court, received 12 years. Nadine received 27 years. 27 years. I sat in the same seat, same row, same courtroom, and I heard the judge read the sentence, and I did the arithmetic that I could not stop myself from doing. Nadine was 39 years old. She would be 66 at the earliest possible release. Micah would be 39, the same age she was when she placed him in a basement and called him an intake. I do not know if that symmetry occurred to the judge. It occurred to me, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. After the sentencing, Owen Brightwell met me in the courthouse hallway. He carried a single folder. The civil case. Divorce finalized, full custody awarded, Nadine's parental rights terminated, asset recovery initiated against the $412,000 in structured deposits, and the Lewisburg properties contested equity. He handed me the folder with no ceremony. The legal architecture is complete, he said. What you build next is yours. I took the folder and walked out of the courthouse into a March afternoon where the dogwood trees along the Capitol lawn were beginning to bud. I called Micah from the courthouse steps. He answered on the second ring. 27 years, I said. He was quiet for 5 seconds. Then he said, Dad, can Caleb come over this weekend? That was the moment I understood that my son had already begun building something I had not yet learned to design, a structure that faced forward, with windows on every wall, and no locks on any door. Caleb came over that weekend. He arrived in Frank Renner's pickup truck at 10:00 a.m. on a Saturday morning in March, wearing a jacket that was too large for him and carrying a backpack that contained, according to Frank, 1 change of clothes, a toothbrush, and a library book about the Golden Gate Bridge. He had checked it out himself from the Beckley Public Library. His first independent action since coming home. Margaret told me on the phone. He chose it because Micah had told him through a basement wall that the Golden Gate Bridge was the most beautiful thing his father had ever described. I had never described the Golden Gate Bridge to Micah as beautiful. I had described it as a suspension structure with a main span of 4,200 feet, 2 towers rising 746 feet above mean high water, and a total cable wire length of 80,000 miles. Micah had translated that into beauty for a 9-year-old boy shaking in the dark, and I suppose that is what fathers build without knowing it, not the structure itself, but the way it is remembered. The boys spent the morning in Micah's room. I did not listen at the door. I sat in the kitchen and reviewed blueprints for a project I had been avoiding for 3 weeks. A renovation proposal for a juvenile detention center in Alderson, 40 miles south. The Bureau of Prisons had contacted me in January, before the trial, requesting a structural assessment and modernization plan. Standard work. The kind of project I had completed 47 times. But when I opened the drawings, I could not look at them the way I used to. The existing facility had been built in 1974. Cinder block construction, poured concrete floors, steel frame doors with exterior mounted locks. The cells were 8 by 10 feet. The windows were 4 inches wide and positioned 7 feet above the floor, high enough to admit light, too high and too narrow to offer a view. The ventilation system was original, undersized, cycling air at roughly 60% of current code requirements. The recreation yard was enclosed by a 12-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Every measurement I reviewed was familiar. Every specification was something I had written or approved in some other facility, in some other year, for some other population of people the system had decided to contain. I closed the drawings. At noon, the boys came downstairs. Micah was carrying a sketch pad I had not seen before. He must have taken it from the office supply closet, and Caleb was holding a ruler. They sat at the kitchen table without asking, and Micah opened the sketch pad to a page he had already begun. It was a building. Not a bridge, not a house. A building, drawn in pencil with the careful, slightly irregular lines of a 12-year-old who had inherited his father's spatial reasoning but not yet his drafting tools. The building had 2 stories. A flat roof, large windows on every wall, and a front entrance with no gate, no intercom, and no lock. The interior layout showed a central common room, surrounded by smaller rooms, each with a window, each with a door that opened inward, a detail I recognized immediately as significant, because doors that open inward can only be locked from inside. "What is this?" I asked. "It's a place for kids like Caleb," Micah said, "where they can stay when they don't have anywhere safe." I looked at the drawing. The proportions were wrong, the walls were too thin for load-bearing, the window spans were too wide for the roof weight, and the staircase had no landing, which violated every building code I had ever read. But the intent was structurally perfect. Every line served protection. Every opening served light. Every door served the person inside it, not the person outside. "The windows are too wide," I said. "The headers can't support that span without a steel lintel." Micah looked at me with an expression I had not seen in 5 months, the expression of a boy who had just been told that his rectangle was a house and wanted to know what came next. "So we add a steel lintel," he said, "and the staircase needs a landing. Code requires it for any rise over 12 feet. Okay. We add a landing." Caleb watched this exchange without speaking, his eyes moving between Micah and me, the ruler still in his hand. Then he placed the ruler on the sketch pad, aligned it with the front wall, and drew a straight line across the bottom of the page. "What's that?" Micah asked. "The ground," Caleb said. "Every building needs ground." I excused myself from the table and walked to the bathroom, and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bathtub for 4 minutes, because I needed to be in a room where 2 boys could not see my face. When I came back, they had added the steel lintel and the staircase landing, and were debating whether the common room should have a fireplace. That afternoon, I called the Bureau of Prisons and declined the Alderson project. The project manager, a woman named Sandra Chen, whom I had worked with for 9 years, asked if I was taking a leave of absence. I told her I was changing what I built. "Warren, you've designed 47 facilities. You're the best structural architect we have for secure environments." "I know. That's why I'm stopping." The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Sandra did not argue. She had followed the trial and the news everyone in the federal architecture community had. She said she understood. And I believed her, though I also understood that no one who had not crawled through a ventilation shaft into a basement where children were locked in rooms they could not leave truly understood what I was leaving behind. Or why. Over the following weeks, I began redesigning. Not the Alderson facility. Something new. I worked from Micah's sketch as a starting document, correcting the structural deficiencies while preserving every design intention. The windows stayed wide, but received steel lintels rated for the load. The doors stayed inward, opening but met fire code egress requirements. The central common room expanded to accommodate 16 occupants comfortably. The staircase received its landing. The flat roof became a green roof, a planted surface that could function as a garden, accessible to residents, visible from every second-floor window. I drew the building the way I draw every building, to specification, to code, to the tolerances that keep structures standing through wind and load and time. But for the first time in 26 years, I drew a building whose purpose was not to keep people in. It was to keep them safe. Micah watched me draft. He sat across the table, doing homework. Real homework. From the public school in Lewisburg, where he had enrolled in January, and where his teachers reported that he was quiet, attentive, and unwilling to sit with his back to a door. His ADHD medication had been reinstated. His weight was returning. The hypervigilance had not disappeared, but it had evolved from a survival mechanism into something closer to his original trait, the eidetic observation that noticed everything and forgot nothing. He was rebuilding himself the way buildings are rebuilt after structural failure. Not by replacing the damaged sections, but by reinforcing them until they bear weight again. One evening in April, Micah looked up from his homework and studied the draft spread across the table. "Dad," he said, "does this building have a name?" I had not named it. In 26 years of federal architecture, buildings receive designations, facility numbers, project codes, budget line items. They did not receive names. Names were for homes, for schools, for places where people chose to be. "Not yet," I said. "Can I name it?" "Yes." He thought for 9 seconds. "I know, because I counted, and I will always count. Because counting is the language my son and I share, the way other fathers and sons share a sport or a song." "The other side," he said. 15 months after the raid, on a Saturday in January, I drove Micah and Caleb to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. The trip was 4 hours and 27 minutes from Lewisburg. I had calculated the drive time 3 separate ways because that is what I do. And because I had promised a 9-year-old boy, now 10, now 30 pounds heavier, now capable of sitting in a car without checking the mirrors every 4 minutes, that I would take him to see a bridge that goes all the way to the other side. Promises made through basement walls do not expire. They accumulate interest. We left at 6 a.m. Micah sat in the front seat with a thermos of hot chocolate and the sketch pad he had not stopped carrying since March. Caleb sat in the back with the Golden Gate Bridge book he had checked out from the Beckley Library 9 months earlier, and renewed so many times that Margaret Renner told me the librarian had offered to simply give it to him. He declined. He said he liked knowing it had a place to go back to. The morning was cold and clear. The kind of January day where the sky looks like it was drafted with a T-square hard blue lines, no clouds. Visibility measured in dozens of miles. We crossed into Virginia on Route 64, and the mountains flattened into Piedmont, and the Piedmont surrendered to tidewater, and the boys watched the landscape change with the attention of people who had learned that geography determines what happens to you. I did not play music. I did not fill the silence with commentary about the bridges we would see or the engineering behind them. I let the drive be what it was, 3 people moving east toward the ocean because a boy had asked a question through a wall and another boy had answered it. We reached the western shore at 10:27 a.m. I parked at a pull-off near the bridge's approach, and we got out and stood at the railing and looked. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge is not the longest bridge in the world, nor the tallest, nor the most architecturally celebrated. It is a dual-span structure, the original westbound span completed in 1952, the parallel eastbound span added in 1973. Combined length, 4.3 miles. Vertical clearance at the main channel, 180, 6 feet. Construction materials. Steel and concrete. The two substances I have spent my entire career understanding. It is, by every measurable standard, an ordinary bridge doing an extraordinary thing, connecting two pieces of land across water that tried to keep them apart. Caleb stood at the railing and stared at it for a long time. The wind off the bay pushed his jacket against his thin frame, and he held the railing with both hands. And he did not speak. Micah stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and he did not speak either. I stood behind them both and I counted the seconds because I could not help it. 43 seconds of silence while two boys looked at a bridge that one of them had dreamed about in a room with no windows and the other had described through a wall he could not see past. Then Caleb said, "It does go to the other side." "Yes," Micah said. "I told you." We drove across. Both spans eastbound first. Then we turned around and came back westbound. Caleb pressed his face to the window and watched the water below and the sky above and the steel cables that held everything together. And when we reached the western shore again, he turned to me and asked a question that I will carry for the rest of my life. "Mr. Caldwell, did you build this bridge?" "No," I said. "I didn't build this one. But you could, right?" "You know how?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror, a boy who had weighed 61 pounds in a room that smelled of blood and urine, who had shaken through the night until a 12-year-old stranger told him stories about structures that cross impossible distances. A boy who was now 10 years old and 30 pounds heavier, and asking an architect whether the things that carry people from one side to the other are within the scope of what he knows how to build. "Yes," I said. "I know how." He nodded once, satisfied, and opened his library book to a dog-eared page and resumed reading. The question had been answered. The bridge was real. The other side existed. That was enough. We stopped on the drive home at a nursery outside Staunton, Virginia. I had planned this stop, but had not told the boys. I parked and walked inside and purchased a dogwood tree. A Cornus Florida. Bare root. 4 feet tall. Dormant in its winter packaging. The nursery owner told me it would bloom in April. White bracts with pink edges. And that it needed well-drained soil and partial shade and patience. "Why a tree?" Micah asked when I loaded it into the trunk. "Because we need something in the yard that isn't a building." He considered this for 3 seconds. "Where are we planting it?" "Front yard. Where the curtain rod used to be." He understood. The curtains with the blue anchors that Nadine had hung and that he had torn down on his first day home had left 2 bracket holes in the bedroom wall that I had never patched. Not because I forgot, because patching them felt like erasing evidence. But a tree is not a patch. A tree does not cover what was there. It grows beside it. We planted the dogwood that afternoon. The ground in the front yard was cold but workable Lewisburg clay. Dense, demanding. The kind of soil that resists easy roots but holds them once they take. Micah dug the hole. Caleb held the tree upright while I backfilled. We watered it with a garden hose that had not been used since October, the month when everything changed, and the water pooled around the base and soaked into the ground and disappeared. Frank Renner arrived at 4 p.m. to pick up Caleb. The boys said goodbye in the front yard beside the newly planted tree, and Caleb hugged Micah, a gesture I had never seen him initiate with anyone, and said, "See you next weekend?" "Every weekend," Micah said. I watched Frank's truck pull away, and I stood in the yard with my son beside a 4-foot dormant tree in January clay, and I understood, finally, what I had been building for the past 15 months. Not a case. Not an escape route. Not a prosecution. Not even the other side. Though that building was now in its 3rd design revision and had attracted the attention of a non-profit housing foundation in Roanoke that wanted to discuss funding, I had been building what every structure ultimately exists to create. A distance between what was and what comes next. A span across water that tried to keep two sides apart. A bridge. Micah looked at the tree. "It doesn't look like much right now," he said. "It's January," I said. "Give it until April." He nodded. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the sky, hard blue. No clouds. The same sky we had driven under that morning on the way to see a bridge that goes all the way to the other side. "Dad," he said. "Yeah, thank you for coming back early." I put my arm around his shoulders, broader now, filling in. The architecture rebuilding itself one day at a time, and I held him the way I held him in a concrete room 15 months ago, except this time no one was counting.